Hello, and welcome back to Canid's News, alternatively, Exoff News. Today, July 26th, 2020, marks the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act being signed into law. To honor that historic event, our coverage tonight will focus on this act and its effects on our great nation.
Before we further discuss the significance of this legislation in our nation, we must first acknowledge a few key figures who fought their whole lives to bring about change for themselves and the future generations. Justin Dart Jr. was labeled as the father of the ADA after bringing back stories from disabled people around the nation showing the hardships and discrimination they face as a result of their disability. He became an advocate for the civil rights of disabled Americans after contracting polio in 1948. Dart was inspired by the support that those around him provided, and when he married his wife Yoshiko, they both made it their mission to improve the rights of women and disabled people. Just after he was elected to be the vice chair of the National Council on Disability, him and his wife traveled the country twice collecting the stories that I mentioned earlier. Upon presenting these, Senator Tom Harkin and other prominent leaders wrote the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. Dart eventually ended up sitting by George H.W. Bush whenever the ADA was signed into law. Evan Kemp Jr. was another prominent figure in the fight for the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. At the age of 12, Kemp was diagnosed with sporadic muscle weakness that eventually caused him to walk with a lurch. When searching for work as a lawyer, he was denied by 39 law firms and was forced to work with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Here, he further injured his leg whenever it was crushed under the garage door that he was forced to use as an entrance. Following this injury, he was forced to use a wheelchair, making his disability even more visible and causing the commission to prevent him from taking any higher-level supervisory positions. He won a job discrimination suit over his treatment by the commission, then left 3 years later to advocate for the rights of those with disabilities. Kemp was made the chairman of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission not long after and played a massive role in the writing of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
This act has many points of significance, but to understand the importance of this act, we need to have an understanding of how the United States treated disabled Americans before the passing of Section 504 in 1973. Disabled citizens were treated as second-class individuals. They were viewed as freaks and charity cases. They were turned away from public services because accommodations were not provided or even thought of for them. They were seen as other rather than American citizens. The ADA changed this. The ADA expanded the protection for disabled persons to virtually all things, excluding a few private institutions. This act prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs, schools, transportation, and all public and private places that are open to the general public. This was the significance because IDEA 504 only protected disabled citizens from discrimination in entities that received federal funds. The ADA has 5 titles. The first one is titled Employment. This one helps people with disabilities have access to the same opportunities and benefits as those who are not disabled. Title 2 is for state and local government. This title lays out the process the government can take to avoid discrimination at a lower level of government. The third one is titled Public Accommodations. This title prohibits places of public accommodation from discriminating against disabled individuals. Title 4 covers telecommunication. It requires companies to provide a service that allows individuals with hearing and speech disabilities to communicate over the phone. The last title, Title 5, covers miscellaneous provisions.
Even before the Americans with Disabilities Act was written and signed into law, there was an immense struggle within the Supreme Court to decide who qualified as a person with a disability. In the case of Southeastern Community College v. Davis, a hearing-impaired woman was seeking admission to the nursing program at Southeastern Community College. The court decided that she was unqualified to complete the clinical requirements and therefore could not participate in the program. This revealed the clear misunderstanding and even hostility over the idea that one can be discriminated against based on their disability. The Supreme Court also used their decision to include several broad, negative interpretations of Section 504 that caused many to doubt that it could ever accommodate the needs of persons with disabilities. Later, in the case of Consolidated Rail Corporations v. Daron, the disabled community focused on educating the court. The issue in the case had to do with whether employment discrimination was covered by the anti-discrimination provisions of Section 504. By filing an amicus brief on behalf of 63 organizations dedicated to protecting the rights of Americans with disabilities, they sought to display concerns of the millions of Americans who struggle with discrimination based on their disability. The victory in this case was a huge milestone for the disabled community because it found that employment discrimination was prohibited by Section 504. The fight for anti-discrimination policies for persons with disabilities expanded further in the case of School Board of Nassau County v. Arline, where lawyers in the AIDS community and the disability rights community joined together to create the foundation for coverage of people with AIDS under Section 504 and the ADA. This partnership later became critical in the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Hello, this is Hannah speaking about the opposition against the ADA in this rainy weather. The opposition against the act have come from several sides of the spectrum, including the broad critic-based audience who argue that the ADA threatens employment as well as makes the U.S. labor market more similar to that of Europe. This has served as a central argument against the act. Like Holly mentioned, the overarching reach of the law, including how far it should sweep and how much it should require of the entities it regulated, has been questioned, spurring conflict about some written terms, including readily accessible and reasonable accommodation. This sense of undefined meanings extended to the entire concept of disabilities and what qualified individuals as disabled. Such constrictive borders of what is and isn't a disability within the ADA faced opposition for its lack of complete coverage for citizens with disabilities, leading to the passage of the ADA Amendments Act. This act extended the scope of the definition of disability to be as broad as possible. ADA lawsuits, which have generally increased over time, have allowed the Department of Justice to enforce the act on a more wide spectrum, playing a role in enforcing economic opportunity. Thank you.